Let me start by a paraphrase. I have a dream. And I have a very simple dream concerning the future of Europe. My dream is that the EU is back to normal. It is strong and it acts in the interest of its citizens. Does it sound too simple? Yes, it's very simple. But the problem is that the EU is not doing anything now as I dream about. What do we see nowadays? Well, what I see is an extremely ideological and irrational EU, which acts in the name of ideologies, and these ideologies are infecting everything, including the economy. Ideology, like greening and sustainability, which for me should be a kind of economic policy, but here what we see is this policy, which was announced in 2019, 5 years ago, and it was a kind of big speech delivered by von der Leyen in her investiture. Well, she was declaring it as an economic policy that will help Europe to increase again. But what we see in reality is that this kind of economic policy, as it is ideology-driven, is not based on economic interest. So that's why we have very serious competitiveness problems in Europe. Then we have the woke culture. I don't want to go into details because a lot has been said on that, but it's again infecting all our policies. Somehow I have the impression that acting against our basic DNA has become a kind of driver too, like being pro-war, which is, if you think, for people, I cannot imagine that there is anything more precious than peace. So I think that's why we can say that we are out of normal now. So my diagnosis, still in a couple of sentences, and the recipe I would offer. And let me have a stronger economic focus because I mostly deal with economic and international trade issues in the parliament. So for competitiveness, as someone who still believes in figures and thinks that, well, we should act on the basis of figures, especially if we take economic policy decisions, let me just quote some. In 2023, the EU GDP grew by 0.5%. Meanwhile, the USA by 2.5%. What about the provision for this year? The EU is expected to grow below 1%, while China is expected to spend by 4.6%, which for them is very little, because they used to grow by two-digit figures. But even the sanctions hit Russia will grow by 2.6%, compared with the EU less than 1% provision. The EU share of world GDP has been in a permanent decline. In 2010, the share of world GDP for Europe was 22%. Now we are at 17%. In the last 15 years, the US economy expanded by 82%, while the Eurozone economy expanded by 6%. I don't want to frighten you more, but still some figures. In 7 out of the last 10 years, the EU has grown more slowly than the US, and this is not just a snapshot. There are no European companies among the 20 top largest companies of the world. In the top 10, nothing. Total Energies of France is the 21st, Volkswagen from Germany is the 29th. In the top 10, we have 6 US, 3 Chinese, and 1 Saudi Arabian company. If we mention to FDI, it fell in the EU by 2/3, meanwhile in the US it increased by 2/3. So our strength of attraction is going down. Our strength of attraction remains only there for those people who are willing to immigrate for economic reasons mostly and for the safety of this continent. But my question is how this European model, European social model, can be sustainable for a long time if we have no means to keep it in an economic term. So sustainability has become an exclusive word for greening and not in economic terms. And nobody worries about, and that makes me worry a lot. A final word on greening, as it was the main project of the last 5 years of the European Parliament and Commission mandate, which really made a breakthrough in greening was Putin, as COVID was the main driver for the digital transition. I would not be especially thankful to him for that, but speeding up definitely happened afterwards. But at what price? That's the question. We cannot bear the 100% of the burden of greening. We are responsible for, the figures vary a bit, between 7 and 9% of worldwide emissions, and we take the burden on our own. So it is something like shooting our own legs. Another consequence of mistreating economic policy in Europe. Of course, the war is not because we wanted it to happen, but the reaction we are giving is again making a lot of harm to the European people. Skyrocketing energy prices, skyrocketing inflation of the last year, and the sanctions. So the sanctions, nobody can convince me that there is no price on the European side for these sanctions. The Commission, I asked several times in different fora whether they make proper objective calculations of the price of the sanctions. They calculate the damage on Russia. They calculate some damage on the EU overall, but they never calculate the price each and every member state pays for the sanctions. And again, by skyrocketing energy prices, we will not have a competitive industry in Europe. We are talking a lot about bringing industry back to Europe, but we are doing very little for that. And the final factor, before I go to my recipe sign, is we have put an immense burden on European companies' shoulders. Bureaucracy has become their major preoccupation. Slowly, they are dedicating more time to abide by the new obligations by different norms than producing and servicing, which would be or should be the real objective. And just the last word on other issues and not just economy. This mandate was really champion of creating a lot of division among the member states. By rule of law mechanism, by conditionality mechanism, we are just creating very important gaps among the member states. And what is clearly sure after this 3 years experience of this entire exercise of rule of law and conditionality, that there are no objectivity in this process. So the Commission acts in a very discretionary and authoritarian way, and nobody can stop them, especially when we have a European Parliament leftist majority, which is practically blackmailing the Commission not to follow, not to be objective. Because if you are objective, and if a member state does what it has promised, delivers, then it's taken to court. So, I mean, we are really out of the normal ways of doing things. So, and I haven't mentioned corruption. A lot has been said on that. Well, actually, I'm almost next door with a member of European Parliament who was in jail and now is out, and I don't see any serious consequences. So what kind of recipe I would like to give, or I would like to see? And as I'm said, back to normal, which should not mean very big things, but I think would be very vital for the European people. The first, that we want peace and not war, and we should work for an imminent and unconditional ceasefire and peace talks, and we should invest all our energy and credibility to that. Second is that our borders are controlled. And I'm not saying something very special, because we even have the obligation to control our borders. The Schengen Code is clear on that. There is no country, there is no community without fixed borders, and we still act as if we had no fixed borders. Asylum seekers should be treated, and their asylum requests should be judged outside the continent, and no illegal migration should take place. But the PC language here is manage migration, and I'm very convinced that we have to stop it. My third point is ideology should not be the main driver any longer for whatever we do in the European Union. I don't mind having intellectual debates, having political groups based on ideology, but it cannot be that the case that European economic policy is driven by ideologies. Value issued should be taken back to the member states where they belong to, where according to the treaties, the member states have competencies for that. So the main driving force should be competitiveness. Every and each new piece of legislation, before it's published, should be evaluated whether it's positive or negative concerning EU's competitiveness. Number 4, respect for the treaties. No creeping integration. No acting outside the treaties. So institutions should go back to where they belong to and should always act in the remit of their competences, which are clearly laid down in the treaties. 4, live and let live. Actually, it was said in the previous panel. It's very simple, but very important. No, do not give lessons to others, to other member states, to other people inside this community, how they should live their lives, because it belongs to them, and they should decide about it. And, and my final point is bring back the culture of mutual respect, because we should respect one another, because it's a community, and I believe that we have a lot of in common. We have common values, and we are not here to be the policeman of one another, but we are here to make things better in the interest of our citizens. What I'm saying, I think, is very simple. This back to normal is a very simple motto, but we do need courage for going back to normal, but I see the courage in the people here. Well, we had to be very courageous, and congratulations to the organizers for being courageous and for not giving up and fighting for our basic freedoms. And they were doing it extremely successfully. And what they managed to create unity among conservative forces. Sometimes in the parliament we are not very successful at that, we have to say that. But it's a very important momentum, and we have to keep it a momentum. We have to convince our voters to go to the polls and vote for us, and by this change the present way of doing things in the European Union. Thank you so much.